Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome to the stage the Atlantic Council's Executive Vice Chair and founder of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, Miss Adrienne Arsht.
I really like that music. I really would like to have said to everybody, just let's get up and... Okay. Well, good morning and welcome. It's a packed house, and for good reason. It's an important country, important relationship, and I'm glad we're here to discuss it. Together with our Fondesa partners, it's really a privilege to convene this timely conversation on the growing importance of US-Colombia security and economic cooperation. We are also glad to be here to kick off a year-long partnership with them, focused on exploring opportunities to advance Guatemala's economic growth and investment potential. I don't know if it's sharing something confidential, but as you know, we're standing by for the final approval to import avocados, and we're thinking that maybe another 6 weeks or so. This is a particularly strategic moment to do this, not just because of the avocados, but as President Arevalo is currently in Asia, visiting Taiwan and Japan, a visit that further underscores the geostrategic alignment between the US and Guatemala. The depth of this engagement between our two countries has accelerated in recent months. At the highest levels of both governments, we are seeing a renewed commitment to this strategic partnership, one that recognizes that our economic and security futures are deeply entwined. For example, the recent agreement to modernize Port Quetzal, and I've now learned that that is the national bird, and it's magnificent. So for the port to be named that, it needs a little help, I think, to get as spiffy as the bird. And recently, when Marco Rubio visited the port, he signed an agreement for us to have a partnership in helping to modernize the port. Port Quetzal is not just a port, as the name would suggest. Rather, think of it as a gateway for trade, investment, and regional competitiveness. The development and modernization of key infrastructure like this should be at the forefront of both parties' interests. The US is Guatemala's largest, and shall I say, most important, trading partner. Over 30% of Guatemalan exports are destined for our market. And as the Arsht Latin America celebrated in February, the future entry into the market of the Guatemalan avocado. So the exports, or from this side, the imports, are soon going to increase. Beyond trade, Guatemala's recent credit upgrade to BB+ signals growing international confidence in the country's economic trajectory and opens new doors for private capital and development. There are also many efforts to strengthen the rule of law, dismantle criminal networks, root out corruption, and provide economic alternatives that are not just in Guatemala's interests. They are a vital part of our national interest as well. That is why gathering here today is so important, to advance a conversation and foster action that recognizes both the opportunities and shared challenges ahead. Thank you all for being a part of this dialogue, discussion, and friendship. And before I turn the floor over to Capricia Marshall, who is the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center Ambassador in Residence, and she will be speaking with the ambassador to Guatemala, that I'm very proud in his background. He received from Spain the Order of Isabel la Católica, and I share the recipient of that, and I feel very bonded and proud. And on that note, Capricia and Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Adrienne, for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Beteta. We are so excited to have you here this morning for this, this very important conversation. It is regrettable that unfortunately Ambassador Bradley was unable at the last minute to join us on stage due to a diplomatic issue that he needed to address. As Adrienne pointed out, in recent months, we have seen a renewed energy in the US-Guatemalan relationship. Whether these conversations are on trade, infrastructure, security, migration, you name it. As she said, we are at a connection, and we want to take advantage of these opportunities. So we have a lot to discuss today, and let's start with a broad question here, Mr. Ambassador. How would you describe the bilateral relationship today between the United States and Guatemala? And to take that just a little step further, what are the areas that the Guatemalan government is prioritizing as they look at this partnership?
Well, of course, the U.S. is our main trading and investment partner. We've had 176 years of continuous diplomatic relationships, and of course, we share very many issues. Very many Guatemalans have chosen the U.S. as their place to fulfill their dreams. And of course, as the administration changed, we knew there were important changes in the works. Some of them we categorize as tectonic changes. And yet, you know, after 130, 140 days, we can say that the relationship has deepened, strengthened. It all, I think, started in many ways by Secretary Rubio's visit to Guatemala in February, when he was very clear, indicating that America first doesn't mean America alone, and that Central America and the Western Hemisphere were going to become a priority for this administration. And of course, we jumped at that opportunity. We had a very forward-thinking conversation and a very defined agenda that I think set us in a path to deepen and strengthen our relationship with the U.S., which of course is very important. What were the areas that we focused? Of course, addressing migration, the migration issue. He basically said, you know, we have to deal with the flows, and if we stop the flows, we will create the political space in Washington to address the stock and the key issues of migration reform. So, but work with migration first. We also were very serious about strengthening our borders, and in terms of working with CBP and the INL to get secure borders is a shared priority as well. But deepening economic ties, and that was also, you know, a key message that we're listening, is that not everything will be solved through taxes and the state solving issues, but we have to create a renewed space for private sector solutions, investment, trade, and they emphasized, you know, traditional cooperation and focuses more on markets, working with the private sector. And so that was, you know, having secure borders and modernized borders was also another key message. Of course, we also worked on the diplomatic forefront. We were very active condemning the situation in Venezuela. We received, that was with the previous administration, it was very important, 135 political prisoners from Nicaragua, and kept our embassy in Jerusalem. Of course, a renewed and strengthened relationship with Taiwan. That it meant that we had a lot of shared space on the foreign affairs front with the American administration, the new American administration, and of course, from our end, democratic stability was also very, very important. So we faced a very difficult situation in Guatemala, in which we were having some undemocratic actors who did not want President Arevalo to take over as president, and having the support and advice of the American government and administration, of course, has been crucial for those efforts to sustain democracy in Guatemala.
Wow. Okay. That is an ambitious schedule. That is an ambitious agenda. I think just one of those topics we could dive into and spend the rest of our time here. But let's talk just a little bit further about recent developments in the US-Guatemalan partnership. And this was the signing of the 30-year cooperation agreement with the US Army Corps of Engineers to modernize Puerto Quetzal, an initiative first announced on that visit that you just mentioned by Secretary Rubio. Could you walk us through the scope of that partnership, and what does the agreement entail, and how does it align with shared US-Guatemalan priorities around regional trade and security?
But let me go back to 2 weeks ago. We had an incredible confluence of military actors in Guatemala. The head of the commander of the Southcom, Admiral Alvin Hosley, was in Guatemala conducting with 6 other countries joint military exercises that were focused on cybersecurity. So as part of these relationships, how we address in a coordinated manner, in a coordinated fashion, these issues of transnational crime. And this entailed, armies from 6 countries. And when they were there, the National Guard of Arkansas was also helping us with humanitarian disaster relief training. That's when the general who manages the U.S. Corps of Engineers came to Guatemala to sign this agreement. This agreement gives certainty to our economic actors that a serious partner is going to be there for whatever it takes to fix our ports. We're going not only to build infrastructure, to root out corruption. That was one of the issues that USTR mentioned, by the way, in our ports, but also make sure that the private sector has a horizon of hope that these problems are going to be fixed in a very serious manner. It also sends a message to China that we have decided as a country to work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and our own, with the Ministry of Public Works and the Ministry of Defense. They will not only help us plan, design, and bring up to speed our ports and our freight railway, but also will create domestic capacities for performing those functions in Guatemala. So I think it's a very novel way of facing a very complex situation in which we had to very, very quickly take charge of our ports, but also send a message that this problem will be fixed throughout different administrations. This is a problem that will not be fixed in 2 years, in 3 years. It will probably take 3 or 4 administrations, but by signing this agreement, we will give stability to solve some important problems, some crucial infrastructure, because next it will come, the ports in the Caribbean, but also we're talking about freight trains in the country. So we're thrilled. We are paying for it. We're paying $65 million for these services, and we're using their capabilities, but also signaling that we're serious about fixing these problems with the cooperation of the United States of America.
Infrastructure issues are so incredibly important, and it's wonderful to see that Guatemala is not thinking about the immediate fix, but really looking at this long term. Let's talk about another topic that you raised at the top of our discussion. Guatemala continues to strengthen its relationship with Taiwan. Right. With President Arevalo and Minister Garcia leading a high-level visit to Taipei this week. What are the main goals of this trip? And how does the government see the partnership supporting Guatemala's broader economic development plans and potentially reinforcing cooperation with the United States?
Well, we're reaffirming a relationship that is long-term, that is not something that happened yesterday. And in the future, what we're saying is that we want this cooperation to be more based in very well-connected economies, not just aid, but trade and investment. And we want to offer secure value chains for the U.S. How can we leverage this incredible relationship that Taiwan, Guatemala, and the U.S. enjoy for development, economic growth, attracting investment into Guatemala? So the visit focuses on bringing Taiwanese investments to Guatemala, but in issues that are of key importance for the security of the U.S. We're also opening spaces for our young Guatemalans to go and receive a high-level, technical training in semiconductors and in Taiwan. And we hope that some of these value chains will have an expression in Guatemala. We understand that there are several things that we have to fix in terms of infrastructure, cybersecurity, but the future lies in leveraging this virtuous three-point triangle in the U.S., Taiwan, and Guatemala.
Wow, a lot in there.
It's not free of risks. Of course, our foreign minister was at the inauguration of the president last year, and we suffered the measures of economic coercion by China. We had to face them. And this time that the president is going to Guatemala, we're kind of getting ready, bracing for what's going to happen. But sometimes you have to live up to your words. And President Arevalo is a man of his word. And so he's there. He promised that he was going to go, and we're doing it. And whatever comes next, we'll face it.
Well, it sounds like there could be great benefit from that for not only economic interests, but education, infrastructure. I mean, so many issues across the board. But let's focus a little bit upon just last week. You went on a visit with Foreign Minister Martinez, Economy Minister Garcia, and several private sector leaders on a trip here to Washington for a series of high-level meetings, including with USTR. The delegation, you all, presented a roadmap outlining progress in tackling non-tariff barriers through public-private collaboration. Brilliant. What were some of the key takeaways from those discussions that you can share with us today?
I guess, perhaps discussing the strategy that Guatemala followed. Different countries follow different strategies. President Arevalo was very clear that our strategy will entail diplomatic and political work in Washington, but also an action plan that was going to be worked together with the private sector, led by our Ministry of the Economy. So we were not going to come here to show interest, but with an action plan that has been discussed and worked out with the private sector. We had over 50 meetings in different sectors. It centers, of course, on simplifying procedures, digitalizing things, licenses and all of these requirements that, have the public sector, each one, having their own processes, having one window shopping so they can all come and in a reduced fashion and a simplified and more transparent way, we can facilitate trade and investment in Guatemala. We're also working on procurement so American firms can come and compete in our public works. We're also, of course, there's going to be a lot of work on health and the environment and agriculture so we can kind of make our standards more compatible to those of the region so different firms don't have to face, different standards and different procedures in a region that is pretty much integrated in Central America. So this is something that is good for us. When we saw it, I said, this makes sense to Guatemala, to our government, and we want to work with USTR. The USTR said, Guatemala is not a problem country. The U.S. enjoys a structural trade surplus with Guatemala. For every dollar that Guatemala exports to the U.S., the U.S. exports $2.5, twice as much dollars to Guatemala, and that's because we buy lots of inputs from American firms. So when Guatemala does well in its exports, there are very many firms in the U.S. that sells those inputs, that they do well. So this interdependence is something that we stressed. So they said, so Guatemala is not a problem country at all. When we went to the Department of State, they told us that, that Secretary Rubio had indicated that Guatemala is a priority problem for this issue of tariffs. We, of course, have the position that we have a trade agreement with the U.S. that has worked to create opportunities in Guatemala, and that we should continue under the framework of that trade agreement in this critical stage. Now that we have stopped the flows of migrants, we shouldn't mess up with that. We should just maintain the framework that we have enjoyed, that is our CAFTA agreement, and work with that. Then it will come whatever comes next. But in this period, it is crucial that we keep the system of preferences that and the architecture that we have developed together for the last almost 20 years.
Well, I know our time is almost at an end here, and so I just very quickly wanted to touch upon, again, a part of Secretary Rubio's visit earlier this year, that Guatemala agreed to increase by 40% the number of deportees it receives from the United States. Could you update us on how that agreement is being implemented a little bit further? I know you touched upon it a bit, and how Guatemala is working to reintegrate migrants and their skills into the local economy.
Well, Guatemala hasn't been in the news on this, and no news is good news in that we forged a very good agreement that gave stability and clarified all matters, and I have to recognize that it was with Mauricio Claver Carone, that he was very experienced and very committed, where we got a very early on a way to address the difficulties, and it has worked. We have now, as of yesterday, we have received 166 flights. Our capacities have increased at the time when these flights are increasing. Just yesterday, we inaugurated a second reception center in Guatemala. We have a national program that is called Retorno a Casa. In the diplomatic front, we are opening more consulates in the U.S. Of course, we're setting up printing shops for passports, for national identities, so people can find, we are starting, of course, an app, so people can solve all the doubts on how we can facilitate, a return for those who want to go back to Guatemala. But we also, in Guatemala, we have set up shop with the private sector and with AmCham for job opportunities, access to credit, entrepreneurial. So what we see is that a dignified return and valuing the new skills. Most of those return people that speak English, they know about technology, and we see them as something valuable for the future. And I think that we share that with the private sector. So that in order to make a sustainable return, we have to focus on growth, investment, trade, the economy, and the work together with the private sector. Guatemala.
Your Excellency, I think everyone in this audience and watching us would agree. You have an incredibly ambitious agenda ahead here, and you are moving it along on behalf of course, your own government, but also at forging this very solid bilateral relationship between Guatemala and the United States. So congratulations, and thank you for this opportunity to have this discussion with you here at the Atlantic Council. And now I'm very happy to turn the program over to Jason Marzak, ALAC's Vice President and Senior Director, who will moderate our next panel focused on deepening the economic cooperation between the United States and Guatemala. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Divisiones y abra más puertas. Quiero que entendamos que cuando todos sumamos se hace la diferencia. Diversos como hay palabras en el diccionario. Todos los significados usan el mismo abecedario. Yo soy como tú eres como yo. Cada reto juntos, si estamos juntos, sabe mejor cuando ganamos como tú eres como yo. No cierres el
thank you for host us today. For me, it's a challenge to speak English. Therefore, for me, it's very important to be here to talk about this topic. I think we have many things to cooperate between. For us, all time, for long times, the cooperation with the United States is very, very important. In the short time, it's so important because Guatemala is a very important position in the region to different topics. Risk, but right now, in investing in not only in technology, infrastructure, and all the cooperation that we have is good for not only for Guatemala and United States, all the region can improve in all the possibilities and opportunities in specific to trade of the commerce that is very important.
Thank you so much. Jessica, what do you see to start this off? Why so important?
Guatemala has always served as sort of the linchpin and the first step into Central America for the United States. And I think even from my time at the National Security Council, I really viewed the relationship between the United States and Guatemala, especially the economic relationship, as a critical one, not only for quote unquote developing Guatemala, it's really developing our diversity of markets as well. And so I think that that ongoing synergy, the movement of private capital between the US and Guatemala is going to continue to be strategic and critical as we develop and finally have a one-to-one at par relationship with Guatemala as opposed to an uneven relationship where Guatemala is viewed more as a recipient of our support. We need to have a real partnership. And so that partnership grows from the economic side.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Charles.
And maybe on that note a little bit, Guatemala has very strong relationship ties and commercial ties with the US. Guatemala exports coffee and bananas and other agricultural products.
Avocado soon to be.
Soon to be, hopefully. But Guatemala also buys a lot of stuff from the States, buys grains and buys cotton so they can make textiles that go back to the States afterwards. So we have a very intertwined relationship commercially, so it is very important, the relationship that we have, but not only in trade, but also strategically. Guatemala is the largest economy in the region, so the stability of the region also depends largely on Guatemala. And as you were saying before, the relationship we have with Taiwan and China is very important, especially in these times right now. So I think that the US-Guatemala are natural allies. We are looking for the prosperity of the region and the security of the Americas. So the timing is impeccable, I think.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I want to move on to trade, and I'll start with you, Christina. And Charles, you mentioned the importance of Guatemala insofar as being an importer and specifically the textiles, right? And I think one thing to point out, one of the things we love doing around here is we love crunching numbers as well around here. And what we Guatemala is the U.S. is Guatemala's main trade partner. Over 30% of Guatemalan exports go to the U.S. But also, as we highlighted in one of our new America's Economies in Depth infographics, that Guatemala imports over $500 per capita in U.S. goods, right? So that makes Guatemala a really important importer from the U.S. as well, and we see the positive balance from the U.S. perspective in that trade relationship. Christina, from your perspective, I'm going to ask you a two-part question. What are the sectors that you see as driving this two-way trade relationship, and also how do these flows align with our broader economic priorities?
Thanks for the question, Jason. So obviously we love data too at the Department of Commerce. Yes. So we know that the current data shows that obviously apparel, agriculture, and petroleum dominate our bilateral trade relationship. But looking to the future, we're excited about the potential to explore increased trade in areas of strategic economic importance. Increased U.S. company participation in critical infrastructure, technology, healthcare, and energy all offer a lot of exciting opportunities for U.S. companies and the bilateral relationship. And one of the key issues I think that we have to address is improving and securing infrastructure for Guatemala. And that's really essential for the United States as well, for our relationship. So things like cargo scanning equipment from trusted companies that can reduce the flow of illicit goods into the United States through Guatemala's ports and lead to partnerships with the US ports, which help facilitate and expedite that movement of cargo between our two countries. The presence of equipment from untrusted firms poses risks to critical infrastructure that directly impacts Guatemala's security and that of its allies and partners. And so we know also, too, that connectivity, internet connectivity in rural areas is a priority for the Arevalo administration, and we want to be a part of that. There are many of U.S. technology firms that are already operating in Guatemala and others which have expressed interest. So our commercial foreign service team in Guatemala is already actively connecting these companies to opportunities that will increase rural connectivity while further developing a robust cybersecurity infrastructure. So lots of great opportunities.
Wonderful. That's excellent, Christina. I want to continue to pick up on trade and go to you, Charles. Last week, actually, I saw you last week here as well, right? You were here. You were taking part in some high-level meetings in Washington with USTR, congressional offices, and private sector leaders. And a real central theme as part of those conversations was Guatemala's progress in addressing some of the technical barriers to trade and reinforcing our commercial ties. So, Charles, from your perspective, what were some of the key takeaways from those engagements that you had just recently? And also, where do you see as opportunities, kind of picking up on the question of Christina, as opportunities from the Guatemalan perspective to strengthen our two-way trade partnership?
Well, first of all, we started with that. We had to present Guatemala, what Guatemala really represents, not only trade, but also security and prosperity for the region. Guatemala, as you said, you like to crunch numbers. Guatemala imports $10 billion, almost $11 billion from the States, and sells back $5 billion. So we have the U.S. has a $6 billion surplus in the commerce with Guatemala. So we are good partners. And the second thing is that the trade barriers we used to work under the USDR CAFTA, the DR CAFTA, which had this frame on which we had a free trade agreement. We were working on that. So these new tariffs, when that happened, it has set us down to see what was going on. And one of the things that the USTR said you have these non-tariff barriers that you have to work on. And we have been working with those. The government last week formally sent a letter to the government here in the USTR to sit down and start a dialogue to return, hopefully, to the preferential agreement terms that we had before, as the last 20 years or so that we've been working under the CAFTA. So that will be very important, because Guatemala's investments and Guatemala trade deals that have with the United States, as we were talking before, the cotton industry, for example, that works a lot of the exports that go from cotton from the States go to Guatemala to be transformed into textiles and T-shirts and socks and going back to
Thank you so much, Charles. I think really important, these are CAFTA-DR long-standing trade agreement, and this is a real opportunity, I think, both from the U.S. side, but also I see a lot of interest on the Guatemalan side and President Arevalo in addressing these technical barriers, because this has been long inhibiting the growth of the Guatemalan economy. So a lot of synergy there. I want to move to investment and you, Jessica. Adrienne mentioned at the outset Guatemala's recent S&P global credit upgrade. Great news from BB to BB+. This has brought the country closer to investment grade status, and maybe we'll celebrate with some guacamole when that happens. But this is a milestone, and that could really shift how the international investor community views Guatemala. At Laurafund, you focus specifically on undercapitalized but high potential markets, particularly in sectors like logistics, digital infrastructure, and energy. So in your view, and based on you were recently in Guatemala as well, what makes Guatemala such an attractive investment destination right now?
So I think obviously the upgrade is very good news. Investors always like to see when markets that you're putting on the radar for them to consider for investment, that they're closer to investment grade than not. But I would say that even without the upgrade, Laurafund, and I think this comes from my trajectory having worked on issues in Central America, touched on Guatemala for many, many years, I think that we see beyond sort of the paper, the investment grade ratings, we see a lot of great opportunities. And my trip there really was driven mostly, number one, so that people know that there is a fund out there that is looking at Guatemala to bring in not only American capital, but international capital, because we want to be that bridge to bring fresh, new, non-recycled capital to these markets. But Guatemala really offers a lot of opportunities because there are a lot of serious sponsors and partners in Guatemala. And they work quietly. They have their own platforms. They've invested in energy in Guatemala, in distribution, in transmission, in renewables. They've gone beyond Guatemala. They're investing in other markets across the region. And they're actually setting the tone and the marker and the model for how the types of investors, myself being a private equity, writ large should look at the markets, which is highly opportunistic. You can operate in sectors that maybe the headlines start to say that they're corrupt, they're difficult, they're complicated. We're not afraid of that. So for that reason is why I'm here today, so thank you for the invitation. But particularly for Guatemala, we don't get wedded to those concerns because there's always an opportunity to work with local partners who are serious, to de-risk projects, to bring in new capital, to be highly opportunistic in sectors that perhaps have been abandoned by international finance. I think for our fund in particular, we are looking in energy in Guatemala and distribution and transmission. We are looking at the logistics infrastructure sector as a tremendous opportunity, in part because as the talk of the town on US and Mexico and the border and migration, and I welcome the ambassador's response on what they've done on migration as well, but putting that into one side, the political narrative and the migration narrative, that's step one to a broader agenda as I see it as a private investor now in the region, which is we need to find a way to push capital down from Mexico to go all the way into the isthmus. And that's been my message to a lot of private sector actors as I've traveled all across the region in the last 5 months, that Mexico receives a lot of capital for a good reason, but we need to start pushing that on down, looking to southern Mexico, looking to the northern Guatemalan areas for opportunities for growth. There's nobody operating there. We want to operate there. We want to invest in those spaces. So Guatemala offers a lot.
I couldn't agree more with that message on pushing that capital down across the region. Just a quick follow-up question for you, Jessica. What do you see is still kind of fully, unlocking that potential? What's maybe a quick suggestion of what's missing to be able to do that?
I think, and this isn't symptomatic of just Guatemala, I want to just caveat my response because I think most countries, most of the 30 countries in the region suffer from this issue, which is the issue of not being able to really properly sell themselves. And you have to know how to craft your narrative. You have to know how to position projects. Oftentimes governments, and I saw this working in the multilateral space as well as the DFC and NSC, governments want to present you the whole universe of what's possible. But really what investors are looking for is what's today available.
Yeah.
Where can I step in? Where can I invest? With whom am I investing? How will my capital be used? And I think if governments can start thinking and always think aspirational, you need a macro vision. But at the technical level, start designing a better narrative and more concrete project proposals that will cultivate that interest of investors, because investors are really just looking at the bottom line. What's the return? What are the balance sheets? And I know to look beyond because of my experience, but not every investor has the patience to do that.
So really, tailored specific messages, and I think
messages, deals, and be very concrete about where you see growth.
And let me pick up on that, where we see growth, and turn to you, Vice Minister, because infrastructure has been front and center in Guatemala's development agenda, and also as referenced the S&P before, but that report itself also emphasized the importance of scaling investments, imports, airports, roads, energy infrastructure. As well, in Guatemala last year, Congress passed a law to rehabilitate and modernize priority road infrastructure projects. Capricia and Ambassador Beteta spoke about Puerto Quetzal as well. Last week, the president introduced a new law, a new general port system law to Congress. Huge opportunities in Guatemala on infrastructure. What are the goals behind these reforms? And also, picking up on Jessica's point, what are some of the specific projects that you see in the short term that are most ripe for investment? And how do you see those as also positioning Guatemala to become a more competitive logistics and trade hub overall?
Okay.
Please.
Thank you. Yes. When we start work with the president, his leadership, when we talk about that, we think in not only the short action that the government need to do, with the long term too. Therefore, when we start to work in the law for the new law to framework law for the port, we think that we need to open the opportunity for the sector private too. And therefore, we start to work in the short time with the United States to invest and to have better or more position in the main port, but in long term, we wait where the private sector can invest in new opportunities in one way. Another way is to rethink the model not only for one sector, is to think all the model in thinking in airport system, in road system, and put all together. And therefore, the model that we're building, not only in the the lower framework, we are working in the share the same philosophy or working together with the private sector to rebuild in the process. And one topic that is very important for us is to rebuild the institution to support all the process to invest in the different ways that we are doing right now in the country.
Wonderful, thank you. I want to go, Christina, just because we also you had this very successful Select USA. So I actually had the opportunity to go over to National Harbor and see some of the different booths it was absolutely impressive. What was done as part of that Select USA Investment Summit. And we obviously had a reception here as well, but Guatemalan companies are increasingly looking to the US, not just as an export destination, but looking at the US as a place to invest and looking at the US as a place to expand. There's a number of Guatemalan companies that we work with at the Atlantic Council that have done significant investments in the United States. What are some of the tools or programs that the US government offers to facilitate this? And also, how can we better support this two-way dynamic to ensure mutual economic benefit?
Yeah, thanks so much. We had a wonderful Select USA Summit, our 11th, that was held just a few weeks ago, as you said, at National Harbor. And it's all part of our Select USA program that facilitates and promotes investment into the United States. And the goal, of course, is to create jobs, economic growth, and US competitiveness. And the summit is hosted by the Secretary of Commerce. It's our annual event to attract FDI into the United US states, but the exciting thing was the 19 delegates from Guatemala, and I think it's only going to increase year after year. So the Guatemalan companies represented a wide array of sectors, from healthcare to logistics to energy, all looking to establish a presence in the United States. And we love being able to enjoy Pollo Campero and San Martin in the United States, and we will continue to support Guatemalan food and beverage companies here in the United States, along with any other investors. So the Select USA program, they offer support throughout the year, not just at the conference, to any companies that are looking to invest, through direct introductions to US economic developers, so those states or localities. They'll do the research and data collection that might be useful to the companies to help them decide where to locate. And they'll facilitate connections to help foreign companies identify partners or facilitators. So, and I know that our team in Guatemala is already working with our Select USA staff to connect them with resources and facilitate those introductions and make sure that those 19 companies that came get further along in their plans to be in the United States. But this year, President Trump, recently in March, he introduced a new program called the Investment Accelerator for more ambitious companies. And the executive order established this office within the Department of Commerce to facilitate and accelerate investments above $1 billion. And our team will reduce regulatory burdens, speed up permitting, coordinate responses to investor issues, and work with state governments to roll out the red carpet for these large-scale investors. So I realize that's more ambitious, but we know that Guatemalan companies are into it.
I think you know the buzz in the room that I heard from Guatemalan companies. I bet you're going to get some companies that are interested in taking advantage of that accelerator program. And I also, you mentioned Pollo Campero. We have lunch afterwards. Unfortunately, we're not serving Pollo Campero, but we will have to do so at a future lunch. We just have a few minutes. I want to make sure I don't see any question on askac.org. We could take one question from the audience, and then I want to go back to, we'll take the guy in the middle there. And then I want to go back and see if any times for any final question here. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the great panel. I have a quick question just for you, Charles. You know, it's long been an ambition of the Guatemalan government in the private sector to start attracting more investment from the United States, for example. as an alternative to Chinese, for example, and scale matters a lot when we talk about, a viable alternative to China, for example. One of the ways that Central America, Guatemala in particular, could achieve that scale is through deeper Central American integration. So I was wondering, and perhaps also through linkages to southern Mexico, as Jessica was mentioning. So I was wondering what opportunities or barriers you see to Central American integration, for example, as a solution to the issue of scale, or perhaps linkages to southern Mexico, for example. How can that help, become a more viable alternative as we look, at the competition with China, for example, as a more feasible alternative to China?
Okay, thanks. Well, maybe the better opportunities that we have for scaling in Central America, we have open borders throughout Central America. We work very closely with Mexico. We also have free trade agreements with Mexico in some cases. And the borders are very open in some sense. Of course, the southern part of Mexico, the northern part of Guatemala, they're not very developed in that. So there is a lot of opportunity there also. In Central America, I think that in Guatemala, it's the largest economy in the region. So if you are in Guatemala, you can go to parts of the region. Of course, every country has its challenges. Nicaragua has its challenges, Honduras has its challenges, El Salvador and Costa Rica. So it is a very interesting region. It's not easy to join the whole region together, but if you are based in one of the countries, it is much easier to use the scaling up.
Wonderful. Thanks for the answer, Charles. We have about a minute and 45 seconds. I'm going to ask a quick last question to Jessica. Jessica, you, beyond financing, multilaterals, international financial institutions, bring important technical expertise, risk-sharing tools. You have a lot of experience with both. How can these institutions work more effectively to help a country like Guatemala unlock more local growth and also align even stronger with broader U.S. economic and security objectives?
I think actually to answer that question, I'm going to dovetail a little bit on the question on integration. There's a lot of obsession with Central American integration entre comillas, especially coming from the multilateral space. That's their big pitch. We have to integrate the region because then you create scale, then you bring in private capital. I completely disagree with that notion because that's a hyper ambitious project of integrating multiple countries with different cultural nuances and facets of economic development and growth, investment sectors that are of priority. So integration is much more of a 50 to 100-year plan. I think multilateral institutions would be better serving these governments by helping them understand the lingo and the lexicon of private capital and what actual private capital investors are looking to hear and see in terms of projects and sectors and growth potential for these markets. There's a lot of technical expertise in these buildings. I know that for a fact the IDB has the smartest people often in the room on Latin America and most of the markets, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be producing actionable reports for governments to be able to understand how to develop their legal frameworks, how to improve their regulatory systems. I know it's happening, but I think it needs to be happening in a much more targeted way, aligned with where the highest growth potential sectors are for these markets and helping them translate the lingo of private capital, international private capital for governments to understand. I think that's step one for multilaterals. Step two, on the technical assistance, I think that multilaterals need to get out of the way of private capital because they've created this sort of culture of crutching on concessionary debt. And I think that in the many conversations that I've had with serious private sector actors, they don't even think about concessionary debt.
No.
So at the end of the day, multilaterals need to focus on helping governments translate what private capital is looking to see, helping governments understand deep down those real sectors of growth and what those real projects should look like, long-term, short-term, medium-term, and then just simply get out of the way so private capital can work with serious private sector actors in the market.
Jessica, that's a wonderful note to end this panel, and I want to thank, again, all the panelists, Christina, Vice Minister Soriano, you, Jessica, Charles, for this conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground in 30 minutes, from trade to investment to role of the private sector, and really I think the key takeaway from this panel is the strong momentum for US-Guatemala economic partnership. We're really excited to be partnering with Fundesa to continue to explore how to support economic growth in Guatemala. And so with that, I'll walk down with the panel, and then I'm pleased to turn the stage over to Gabriela Roca, Vice President of Fundesa, for some closing remarks.
Thank you all for joining us today as we conclude this important deep dive into the evolving relationship between Guatemala and the government of the United States of America. It has been a privilege to engage in such comprehensive dialogue that highlights the profound partnership between our two nations. I would like to thank Jason and Adrienne for hosting this important event. Inclusive economic growth, and regional security. As part of the private sector, we're working together with the Guatemalan government through the Guatemalan Moving Forward initiative to focus on 6 critical pillars, which are good governance, investment promotion, industrialization of agricultural products, infrastructure, human capital, and tourism. These pillars are not merely policy areas, but are a foundation for sustainable prosperity that benefits Guatemalans and strengthens our bilateral ties. As you were mentioning before, we need to be very targeted. We cannot be all around everything, so we've discussed and concrete these 6 pillars that are a very important focus for us. For an economic standpoint, Guatemala offers significant opportunities for growth and partnership. The country's strategic position and commitment to digitalization reform make it a competitive player in regional trade. Trade facilitation and infrastructure reforms enacted by Guatemala align well with the U.S. interest, enhancing competitiveness against other regional manufacturing hubs. This cooperation sends a powerful message about the benefits of fidelity and collaboration in the Western Hemisphere, reinforcing our geopolitical strategy. We are the largest economy to have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and in these increasingly dangerous times, it is critical that America shows steady, unwavering, bipartisan commitment to resolve its support of Taiwan's friends, especially as China advances in its agenda in the region. Security cooperation remains a cornerstone of our partnership. The recent signing of agreement between the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Guatemalan Ministry of Defense to increase operations at the Pacific port, Puerto Quetzal, exemplifies our joint effort to boost economic competitiveness, strengthen regional security, and counter transitional threats. This action, as well as all the implementation of the Priority Road Infrastructure Law recently approved by the Congress, send a clear message to the world that Guatemala is open for business as a stable country, committed to greater competition and rule of law. The U.S. government can work together with the Guatemalan government. We recently heard Ambassador here reflecting a clear vision on how Guatemalan government want to enhance that relationship. It is a very strategic and, of course, comprehensive agenda, and we're very compromised to committing with it. In closing, the evolving U.S.-Guatemala relationship is a model on how strategic economic and security cooperation can create a more prosperous and secure future for both nations. We are committed with this road. It is a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and a commitment to inclusive growth and regional peace. As Vice President of Fundesa, I'm very proud to support this collaboration, and I'm confident that together we will continue to advance the well-being of our peoples and the stability of our region. Thank you very much.
Quiero que aunque norte y sur sean distintos, lleven un mismo latido en el ritmo, como quien comparte el mismo apellido, porque al fin y al cabo somos latinos. Quiero que la unión que logra la fuerza rompa divisiones y abra más puertas. Quiero que entendamos que cuando todos sumamos se hace la diferencia. Diversos como hay